Greg slapped me hard across the face, making my senses jangle and my flesh burn. My heart was pounding. But he wasn't finished, and I staggered back, still not believing it. He hurriedly grabbed a gallon of paint from a recent makeover that had been left in the corridor and tossed it over my head. The cold, viscous paint soaked my clothes, dripping into my hair and down my cheeks. As I stood there soaking, I had a mix of anger and embarrassment. Greg's wicked smirk told me he was taking pleasure in my helplessness. My name is Clara, and I am 43 years old. I've been enthralled with Spanish soap operas for years, especially ones with tales of betrayal and deceit. I used to joke that my love of drama was securely confined to the screen, but life has a way of surprising you. I never imagined that I would be part of a complicated plotline comparable to any soap opera. But the man I used to adore had covered me with paint, humiliating me. 6 years have passed since then. I was contentedly unaware of the storm that would finally engulf me. Greg and I had been married for a few years. He was over 10 years older than me, despite the fact that we hadn't been lucky enough to have kids. I thought our life together was satisfying. Because Greg had always been protective, even possessive, I assumed that was the reason for his protective behavior. Then one evening, I received a call from my best childhood friend. Lillian Clara. It's been too long. With a sigh, she began, I wanted to let you know that I got divorced. The despair in her voice was audible. Lillian, that must have been so tough for you. I'm so sorry. I was taken aback by the news, so I answered. We had been close for years, but our life trajectories had taken different turns. We ought to meet up for drinks shortly. You shouldn't handle this by yourself. When I got home, I was ready to break the news to Greg. But before I could react, he shocked me by saying, I already know that Lillian and I are no longer together. Startled, I paused. Wait, how do you know I haven't told you yet? His face was expressionless, but his tone was oddly disdainful. I didn't like his casual tone, but I disregarded it when he shrugged and continued. I must have heard it somewhere. I told him that I would set up a drink with Lillian, which astonished him. Mind was asked if he wanted to accompany Greg. I was too confused by his unexpected interest. I was supposed to aid my friend that night, but I was hesitant. But Lillian had been a longtime friend of ours. I agreed to ask him if he could come. The prospect sounded surprisingly exciting to her. When the three of us got together the next evening, Lillian spent the night discussing her ex-husband, who proved to be an overbearing and unfaithful spouse. Together, we laughed, toasted, and shared stories throughout a warm and sentimental evening. Once, I excused myself to use the restroom. But when I returned, Greg and Lillian sat closer than normal, heads tilted toward each other as they had a lengthy, quiet conversation. The way they looked at each other made my stomach turn. After years of not seeing each other, how had they become so close? Merely a few drinks later, I wondered if I was dreaming, but the uncanny feeling remained. I sat down again, and everyone suddenly stopped chatting and acted as if nothing had happened. I was still nervous, even though the remainder of the evening passed without any problems. As we prepared to leave after finishing our meal, Lillian was obviously drunk. To my amazement, Greg offered to drive her home. I'm your wife. Greg. I continued feeling the need to assert my authority. I can make sure she gets home safely. He smirked and brushed me off. Claire. She lives on the opposite side of town. Just go home and relax. I'll see to that, notwithstanding my objections. Greg insisted that I go home alone. Left with no choice. I reluctantly agreed, but I was overcome by deep-seated suspicion. Once at home, the fear turned to suspicion. I couldn't get the unsettling feeling that Greg and Lillian were more involved than I knew. After pacing the living room for an hour, I made up my mind, driven by intuition. I went into Greg's study, which he was very protective about. I couldn't resist looking through the private space where he stored his business files and personal belongings. After searching through stacks of paper and opening drawers, I finally found an old, dusty photo album hidden in the back of a cupboard. My heart pounded as I opened it, and the images confirmed my worst suspicion. Greg and Lillian were smiling and hugging each other in their arms in nearly every photo. Dates from many years ago are on the backs of the pictures. Shortly after our wedding, my fingers started to shake when I realized they had been seeing each other all along. The betrayal was deeper than anything I had ever encountered, and the realization hit me like a tsunami. My best buddy and my spouse have been lying to me for years. The record was set to be replaced. I heard the front door opening. Greg got home very quickly. I collected myself and held the album tightly. As I walked out of the study and into the hallway, he found me beside the bathroom. I'm hiding my disbelief and anger behind my waning nausea. He approached me and gave me a back rub while wearing a worried look. "I wonder if you're throwing up?" he asked, in his voice. Soft, "Don't touch me." The bitterness barely audible in my voice is spat out. He seemed puzzled until I held up the record as a silent accusation. When he described this, his face was colorless. For a moment, he was stunned. He said fine and shrugged after a long pause. I had cheated on Clara. I realize it was wrong, and I'm sorry. But there was no remorse or guilt in his words. Like a second slap, he was cold. "How did you manage to—" After everything, my quiet voice cracked you and Lillian. We now share everything I thought we had. As he looked at me, his eyes were oddly calm. Lillian and I were soulmates. Clara, we were both trapped in dysfunctional relationships, and I made a mistake by marrying you. I stared at him incredulously at what I was hearing. I spoke with a tone of incredulity. What's that called? Forsaking your wife and skulking around with my closest friend. When he crossed his arms, his arrogance was obvious. We are in sync with our souls. Claire, you were a mistake in my marriage. They avoid me and laugh angrily because their vibrations are incompatible with mine. Are you serious? Now you're defending your betrayal and lying to me with spiritual language. He shrugged, not even flinching. You wouldn't understand. You have no idea how much I depend on you. Before I could respond, his face twisted in frustration. He then raised his hand again and slapped me hard across the face, causing me to stagger back. My cheek hurt as I straightened up, but he went on. He grabbed the bucket of paint from the hallway and poured its contents over my head before I could react. As I stood there, feeling degraded and deceived, I was drenched. Greg wiped the paint from my eyes and smiled smugly, as if he had shown me that I was mistaken. The calm I found within myself even astounded me. You have no idea what you did. I murmured to Greg that he would get even. Even though I was clear in my tone, he just grinned and turned to walk away, ignoring what I had said. Suddenly, he was no longer visible. I tried to take a deep breath. As I grabbed a towel and began to wash myself, I could feel my anger morphing into resolve. I knew I couldn't stand this humiliation any longer. I had to prevent him from winning. After cleaning up, I went back to this research right away. I suspected he had other secrets, and now I was going to uncover them all. I dug through his drawers and shelves until I found what I was looking for. Bank statements, receipts, and financial documents that gave off an eerie vibe. Greg had been secretly putting thousands of dollars into a private account I had never seen before to fund his life with Lillian the betrayed. He had betrayed me emotionally, but it was more serious than I thought. He had also stolen money from me. I carefully put everything back where it belonged after taking images of each document. If he wanted to leave, I would see to it that he paid a high price. Throughout the following days, in solitude, I began preparing. I told the family law expert I hired about every heinous detail, including the adultery, the assault, and the financial fraud. She informed me that I had a strong case for a divorce and a large payment. Meanwhile, I continued to act as if nothing had happened. Greg remained arrogant, unaware that I was deliberately dismantling the comfortable life he had built on false pretenses. I was content with what was going to happen, and for the first time in weeks, I managed to remain calm and focused. I felt like I was in control. A week later, Greg came home late from another night out with Lillian, with the same cocky confidence that had enraged me since the night of the paint incident. I placed a stack of legal documents on the table in front of him after waiting patiently for him to sit down. "What is this?" he asked with a puzzled look on his face. "The end of this phony marriage is near," I replied. My voice is icy cold. "You betrayed me, cheated on me, and stole from me. It will now cost you money." Greg's face lost its color as he stared at the stack of papers. His lips opened slightly as he started flipping through them after realizing I wasn't bluffing. The records contained all the information I had filed to seek damages for emotional and physical abuse, as well as proof of his financial theft and details of his affair with Lillian. He looked back up at me and muttered, "You don't have to do this, Claire. We can fix this." I shook my head, feeling absolutely no sympathy for him. "When you slapped me and painted my head, you went too far." "Greg, there's no going back now." His assurance seemed to falter, and a look of desperation replaced it. "Please. Clara, it cannot go this way. You're not getting it. It's not as simple as it seems." "Oh, I understand it perfectly." I shot back coldly. "You attacked me, took from me, and deceived me. This is the outcome of your actions." Greg looked at the materials with obvious anxiety. As the reality of his situation dawned on him, his conceit disappeared. I'd had enough, but he tried weakly to justify himself. When he finally stood up, he said, "Fine. If you want, I'll go watch him grab his things." I felt exhausted and relieved at the same time. When he went, the house fell into a profound silence. For the first time in years, a sense of serenity settled over me, although I was far from done. My lawyer had advised me to move forward with a formal case to make sure Greg paid for the suffering he had caused and to complete the divorce. Within the ensuing weeks, I concentrated on preparing for the impending court case. My attorney was a powerful individual. She reviewed all of Greg's financial wrongdoings, documenting each mistake and fraud as a whole. We put together a strong case piece by piece that would ensure Greg was held accountable. As soon as Greg and Lillian moved in together, word quickly spread throughout our social circle about their new beginning. People's opinions don't matter to me. Regaining my life and obtaining justice were my top goals. I felt a mixture of resolution and anxiety on the day of the court hearing. I took a seat and tried not to panic. Across from me were Greg and Lillian. Lillian's expression was stoic as she turned her head away from me. This was a long cry from the arrogance on her face when I last saw her. Greg was obviously worried, though, and his confidence began to waver as the procedures got underway. The evidence was meticulously presented by my attorney. All of the evidence of Greg's dishonesty, including bank statements and questionable transfers, was shown to the court. More information regarding the assault came from witness statements given by close friends who had seen the physical evidence of his abuse in the days following the incident. Greg writhed in his chair as the evidence piled up, his face going white. As the judge took notes, Lillian was unable to look me in the eyes. It was clear that she had not expected this soulmate romance. Reality was far different from their romantic vision, which was to go uninjured and begin a new life together without any consequences. After hours of hearing and evidence presentation, the judge made her decision. Greg was ordered to reimburse me for all of the money he had stolen and to give me a sizable sum for the emotional and physical pain he had caused me. He is no longer permitted to come near me or my property since the restraining order was granted. He was also punished for his financial wrongdoings, which led to a large debt load. The judge then read the final terms. I glanced across the courtroom at Greg's gloomy, pale face. Lillian shuffled uncomfortably, as if she would like to be anywhere. But there, piece by piece, the fantasy they had built for themselves was crumbling under the weight of duty. The exit from the courthouse. I felt at ease and liberated at the same time. Despite the fact that my 6-year marriage was dissolved, I felt lighter, as if a heavy burden had finally been lifted. I smiled proudly as I walked out of the building, knowing that I had taken back control of my life. Once the money was dispersed and the divorce was finalized, I threw myself into making a fresh start. After the house was filled with reminders about Greg, it was mine. I redecorated it with vibrant artwork, cozy furniture, and lush plants. The reminders of him were replaced by the things that brought me joy. I even framed a few mementos from my favorite soap operas, which were now more poignant symbols of perseverance. Work became a sanctuary. I worked tirelessly, fortifying relationships with colleagues who had quietly supported me during the challenging final years of my marriage. The liberation I felt was a thrilling contrast to the stifling environment I had been in with Greg. While organizing a corporate event one day, I met Liam, a laid-back, grinding, amiable fellow organizer. Because we both liked soap operas and had similar experiences, we struck up a conversation and became friends. As he recommended some of his favorite TV series, I couldn't help but laugh and talk with him, as though I hadn't done it with anyone in a while. Our relationship developed naturally. Liam was thoughtful and compassionate, never pushing or prying. He knew about my past, but he never expressed interest or compassion, simply understanding. Eventually, I began to trust him because he adhered to the boundaries I had set. We started meeting up for coffee, lunch, and then weekend trips to nearby places. Every moment I spent with him was refreshing and a reminder that peace and happiness were attainable after all the pain I had endured. Months passed, and each day I felt less burdened by my history. I watched my beloved soap operas with a sense of humor, not desire. Knowing that my life was no longer like those imagined occurrences, the pain of betrayal had faded and been replaced by a sense of peace. One night, as we were watching a soap opera together, Liam turned to face me, and his eyes were soft. "Have you ever thought about visiting Spain? Looking at the places we've seen on the screen?" The idea gave me a sense of adventure that I hadn't had in years. "Yes," I remarked, smiling at the thought that we had begun planning the trip not as a way to get away, but as a way to celebrate the life I had recovered. I didn't need the approval of others. I was enough, just the way I was, even if my life had taken more turns than any soap opera. Finally, I was ready to embrace the happiness I so rightly deserved. The chapter on Greg and Lillian had come to an end when I left that courthouse a year ago. I found that I was leading the kind of life I had only ever dreamed of, one devoid of betrayal and terror, as each month passed. My trip to Spain with Liam was fantastic. We ate Spanish tapas, explored the stunning beaches of the Costa del Sea, and walked through the bustling streets of Madrid, relishing each moment as if it were a gift. For the first time in years, I felt light and carefree as I laughed readily and savored Liam's warmth. The dramas we used to only watch on television have been replaced by genuine moments of joy, peace, and love. Upon returning home, I found that my work was fulfilling on a level I had never experienced before. I was promoted and given the chance to lead my own team when my renewed effort and enthusiasm were acknowledged. It appeared to be a turning point and a reward for everything I had endured. With their unwavering support and encouragement, my coworkers were like family to me. And with time, my home evolved into a sanctuary that mirrored the person I had become. Though they seemed like ghosts from the past that could no longer affect the life I was building, I would still think about Greg and Lillian from time to time. Greg's legal and financial problems were causing him distress. I was told that he had moved out of state to avoid the social fallout. When I thought of his death, I was neither pleased nor offended. Instead, it gave me a feeling of closure and a reminder of my progress. One evening, as we were having a quiet dinner at home, Liam took my hand and looked into my eyes thoughtfully. "My life was completely changed by seeing you, Claire. Turn your pain into power. It's inspiring. I'm grateful that our paths meet every day." I smiled as a comfortable feeling swept over me. "You helped me figure out who I am. Liam. You gave me the space I needed to heal and the courage to dream again. I'm grateful, too." Rather than as a romantic fantasy, our lives developed together as a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and strength. There were no pretentious words or promises of perfection. We just decided to help each other through whatever life threw at us. On the anniversary of my divorce, instead of retribution or resentment, Liam and I raised a glass to freedom and delight. That night, I wrote a letter to the woman I used to be, a woman who had been deceived, humiliated, and hurt, but who had recovered. I promised her that I would never forget the fortitude that had carried her through her worst moments. And as I looked around my home, I was encircled by light, laughter, and love. Even though Greg had stolen everything from me, I knew I had discovered something much more worthwhile.